I think we are framing it incorrectly. I think we've had a guy just come on in the earlier piece say, well, it's not Japanese or these kind of different cultures. Islam is a religion of all cultures. You find Japanese Muslims, you find Indonesian Muslims. In fact, the largest Muslim population in the world is in Indonesia. And to say somehow, you know, this is somehow a Muslim problem. Let's look at these grooming gangs. These grooming gangs were individuals that were using alcohol, using drugs, and actually having sessions exploiting these young girls. I don't know what's Islamic about drinking alcohol, drugs, and exploiting young girls.
So you want to separate it definitely from the religion. Do the rest of you feel the same as Mobeen? Saba?
I think Mobeen definitely has a fair point. In this particular case, there are cultural parallels that are being made and religious parallels. Generally, I think across the media, generally, no religious parallel has particularly been made. So I think in your intro is quite interesting. What I do find interesting, the fact that we have an all-exclusive Muslim panel here. But this situation is not just exclusive to Muslim communities, it's across all communities, but therefore it doesn't mean it doesn't happen and it does need to be addressed.
Right. Mobeen, what do you feel?
You know, there's a thing here, there's a pattern that reoccurs whenever this happens. I'm sure you guys can relate to this. When you hear these stories breaking, you wince when you hear Muslim names. And as a community, we are really uncomfortable and we're really used to reacting. We're really used to reacting and saying, this has got nothing to do with us, it's nothing to do with our community. And I don't think anyone in their right mind would say this is a theological issue. They're doing this because they're good Muslims. Of course, no one would say that. Having said that, we have to acknowledge that sex and sexuality and gender and respect for the opposite gender are issues within certain parts of the diaspora. That's the South Asian community, the Arab community, and large sections of the Muslim community. These are things that we have to discuss in our communities, and we've seen this pattern, you know, in Newcastle and in Rotherham, and we can't shy away from these issues.
Right. I'll go back to you, Mobeen, on that. Do you agree with that? So it's a slightly different way of framing it, but do you buy what the other Mobeen has said?
Partially, I think we have to look at this, but recognise we dealing with it. Let me give you a clear image of what actually happened in Rotherham. When the Rotherham grooming scandal came about, British Muslim youth organised the first ever demonstration against these criminals that were claiming to be from our community. Right. We came out and demonstrated. You'll never see the far right come out against Jimmy Savile. I've not seen the EDL come outside the BBC studios. But the point I'm trying to make is, look, we have people coming out. In fact, it was a Pakistani man in Rochdale that recognised these people as victims, and it came out. Let
me bring Anira in and help us out, Anira, sort of between these different interpretations of how we frame the problem. Where are you?
I think the labelling is incorrect. I don't think it's a Muslim problem, as the rest of the panel have suggested, and we happen to be Muslims, as Saba said, which it would have been nice to have other religions, because it's not just the Muslim community, apparently, that has this issue. We've seen many cases where there's been white groups that have been grooming, and there has been young children being raped, but we don't label them as white Christian grooming gangs. We label them by name, or we label them as just a group. And I think it's unfair that that's not the same. These are criminals at the end of the day, you know, and they should be treated like that.
But I think even if they weren't, as I've seen across the board generally, the media hasn't actually called it out as a Muslim-specific case in this particular case today.
We've got a panel of 4 Muslims.
Yes, which is what I mentioned earlier. Which is what I mentioned earlier. But I also think even if it's not, due to the names and the cultural associations, there are cultural assumptions that are made when there are people from certain communities with certain names and backgrounds, and this is from the South Asian diaspora. Yeah. So it's quite hard to separate that. Right. There is that dichotomy does exist.
Can I ask you, Mobeen, start us off on this, about the cultural issues, attitudes towards sex. You kind of raised this.
Yeah,
because you clearly think there is a bit of an issue, and I'd like to hear what the issue is.
I made a programme I think it was about a year ago, called The Muslim Sex Doctor, and I spent time shadowing an imam who was working in this field. And he was very open. He would tell me and I know this and you guys must know this from within the Pakistani community, there are issues in terms of the narrow definition of the kind of women who deserve respect. This is a cultural thing, it's not a religious thing, but culturally we will often, we'll use this word izzat, that means honour, and we will say, you know, a woman who is wearing the hijab, who cooks and cleans, who is the queen of the home, she deserves respect. Now, what happens then when you have people who are raised in those environments and they get jobs as taxi drivers and they're working in takeaways and they join the nighttime economy.
Yeah.
The nighttime economy is an ongoing theme in all these cases. You have these men who've grown up in this climate who all of a sudden are face to face with women who don't fit that model. So women who might like a drink, or women who wear short skirts, or who are quite loud. And that doesn't fit with their definition of a person that deserves respect.
Anira.
That is a problem. You have to address that.
And just following on from what Mobeen said, I think there is an issue within not just the Pakistani, but the South Asian community in terms of women having that level of respect. So, for example, you know, in a family, let's just say there's a son and there's a daughter. The son will be allowed to go outside, stay out till about 10 o'clock, you know, possibly have a girlfriend, whereas the girls have to stay at home. Now, if you are bringing children up in that kind of mindset, they only know that they have to respect that individual in their house, mother, daughter.
I think
That could be a sweeping generalisation
we're
as well.
conflating issues
Yeah,
here.
but
Let me explain.
I do think that this is something that the Pakistani community, the South Asian community need to look into, because as you said, the word honour is a burden on girls mainly, and so they have to live with that. Anything they do is reflective on the whole family and the community, and I don't think it's fair.
No, it is. There is an issue of izzat, but let's look at it and let's not conflate one issue with another issue. There are these men, and we're talking about a criminal mindset of individuals who, like people like Jimmy Savile, live two lifestyles. On the one lifestyle, they live a very public lifestyle where they want to show themselves as being good community members, and they do that. But at the same time, when people say they only see certain women as fair game, let's be honest, if you look at the J report, and Apna Hack did findings on the J report, they found 150 young girls out of the 1,400 were Pakistani girls. The problem is that these people aren't differentiating because they're sick men between white girls and Muslim girls or Pakistani girls, but Pakistani girls, due to izzat and honour, are finding it very difficult to speak out. These are very sick men.
Difficult to speak out. I'm glad you raised that, because Saba, help me out on this. Is there an issue around the ability to converse or to come forward and say, I've been attacked or I've been abused or I've been raped within the Muslim community? Forget the white girl issue.
So I can talk about the South Asian community, diaspora in general, because it exists, and it's not just Muslims, it's the Hindu, Sikhs and other faith communities, because I'm also from that community. From the first generational perspective, it's been something that we don't necessarily talk about because there is the concept of honour. But it is changing, and this group...
Is it?
It is changing, because there are practitioners on the ground and who are actually working with women. And like I said, it's not just an exclusive Muslim issue or a South Asian issue, but there is sometimes, generally from the first generation, that it was slightly difficult. There is a sense of, you know, keeping the honour of the community or protecting women, not because we're therefore protecting the men, but that sometimes that's how it folds out. But
and so it's basically covering up crime or burying crime.
Yes,
because
or how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But then in the Rotherham case, we know that the community did go forward and speak to the police, and the police didn't speak to them. I didn't speak to the victims either. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. However, I also do agree that the police does need the help from the community, and we also need to be active, and we also need to address these issues ourselves.
Completely. I think it is changing, but it's achingly slow. And what I mean by that, and again, I'm sure you guys can relate, you know, I grew up in Huddersfield in Yorkshire. I went to mosque regularly. I know that my experiences did not match up with the conversations at the mosque. So if you are a young man and you want to talk about contraception, or you want to talk about certain feelings, or you just want to talk about sex, you're not going to get that guidance from the mosque. That's
the last place. I mean, because that's a religious place.
And also, not just in terms of it being a religious place, but also in terms of, look at the state of our mosques. The majority of them still today are run by imams who don't even speak the local language.
But they don't also say go out and groom young girls.
No,
Of course they don't, but what I'm
two.
saying though, this is really important. If you are raised in an environment where you can't talk about things like sex, that is going to lead to problems.
Mobeen, I also think that's a cultural dichotomy.
It's entirely
and it's
cultural.
not necessarily going back to the point that
No,
it's
I think we're all agreed. Actually, I think you made that there's a cultural. If there's a problem, it's cultural.
Yes, yeah.
But the question is let's pin down what this cultural problem is. And Mobeen
I also think it's...
I've not said it's a culture.
No. What I mean, I'm trying to. We've ruled out religion at least, but at least some are arguing.
I think
it's
from
cultural.
my own experiences, one issue that I personally have not only come across on a personal level, but also have seen as I've been working nationally, is the fact that sometimes the police does worry about community tensions. And so they are not willing to always go in and talk to the community and talk to the community leaders, who I call self-appointed, most of them are self-appointed leaders, and actually discuss things that are happening.
But that is the argument, effectively, that political correctness gets in the way of policing or enforcing or sorting out some of these problems.
Evan, I'm going to have to come in here. I think that's the biggest lie that's ever told, the biggest excuse. You ask any Pakistani male going into an airport whether they don't stop and search them because of racism, you'll get more likely to be stopped and searched. There's no... And that's preconditioned thinking that this individual may be a criminal. So there's no racism in that. There's no racism in Pakistani drug dealers. Why is there racism in this? I'll tell you why. Because we've been fighting this case for 3 years with South Yorkshire Police, and only now have South Yorkshire Police admitted there was no political correctness in the Rotherham issue, and there was their own internal failings. Because what happened is these officers did not believe these young girls because they were from working class backgrounds.
Right. No,
they were
from and that problem is widely recognised.
Just to say it's racism. Why are you stopping and searching Pakistani males like never before in airports? You're not racist then.
Can I ask whether, I mean, because a lot of people think part of the solution to all of this is going to be for a much more open conversation, more brutally honest conversation, more openness within the community, between communities. But that is going to mean sometimes things like this. We're going to gather Muslims round and we're going to say, is there a Muslim issue?
I don't think we're going to gather Muslims round. I think that's very colonial to say that.
But I know, but what I'm saying is, do you welcome that at all? Or does that in a way scare you?
I completely do. And I think the idea of gathering Muslims around, you know, I think we're starting to see, for example, this imam that I shadowed, he was organising conferences to talk about sex. That's practically unheard of within the Muslim community. I think that's a really great thing to do. But
Saba, do you
the Muslim
agree?
community has to lead on that, and it's just started to happen.
Yeah. Saba?
I think it is important, definitely, but I also think, you know, where we have various voices from various communities, but as we're not all representatives, we're a huge diaspora and we're communities, and we can only speak as individuals, but like I said earlier, there is a change, but I would like to also make a parallel kind of
very briefly,
you know,
very briefly.
where when we, and I know we've ruled out faith earlier on, and you know, when we talk about the Islamic context, we talk about Islam is a sense of justice. So this isn't even about an Islamic context; it's about young girls getting justice for a crime that's committed against them, just as if the church, when it comes to bishops and them grooming young boys, I mean, that's not necessarily, that's the same paradigm and the same sense
Indeed.
of.
We need to leave it there. We've started this conversation. I really appreciate you all coming in and having it. Thank you very much indeed.